Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much, Will, and thank you to everyone for joining us on the call this morning. I'm just going to make a brief announcement, share some of my thoughts, and then, of course, as always, happy to open it up for any questions that you might have. Now, so today, I wanted to announce that Ontario Liberals believe the time has come for the province of Ontario to require mandatory vaccinations for all of our frontline workers in both healthcare and in education. And we also believe that the time has come for Ontario to develop a province-wide standardized vaccine certification system, or vaccine passport, as it is commonly called. We have all gone through so much since this pandemic officially began so many months ago. When you think about the sacrifice and the suffering and the hardship, those who tragically lost their lives or gotten sick, their families, when you think of those who've lost their livelihoods, the toll this has taken on people's mental health in every section of this province and every region of this province, it has just been such a brutal, brutal time. And here we are at a stage when, yes, of course, the vaccine rollout is going reasonably well, thanks in large part to the resilience of the people of Ontario, notwithstanding some of the earlier challenges that we had with the way the province was rolling out the vaccines. I know that we're all feeling good right now, because the weather has gotten better and we're into the next stage of a reopening that we all hope will hold and will last, so we can build that new normal that the people of Ontario are looking for. But we also know, having listened to the science table, having heard from Ontario's new Chief Medical Officer of Health, that there remains a risk of a fourth wave in this province. Now, none of us wants that fourth wave to be bad. I know I certainly don't want my daughter's school to ever have to close again. We don't want small business owners to be forced into another, whether it's a partial or a complete lockdown, God forbid. So we need, as a province, to use every single tool in the toolkit. And that's why today, Ontario Liberals are saying we need mandatory vaccinations for healthcare workers, for education workers, and we need that standardized province-wide, provincial government-led certification system for vaccine passports. And I say that part on the certification system or passports because you all know we are seeing far too many individual business owners who are confused about what they should be able to do, whether the information can be verified. We see individual hospitals, for example, approaching this in different ways. University Health Network just recently announced their approach. We know that others are taking a different approach. This makes no sense. Doing this in kind of a half-hearted, half-measured way makes no sense. And that's not the best way to protect the people of Ontario. We need real leadership from Queen's Park. We need real leadership from Doug Ford at this critical moment. Leadership that we have seen so far is not forthcoming because Doug Ford doesn't want to make the effort to get this right. So Ontario Liberals will continue to work with all of our partners, with all of the stakeholders in the system. I just want to acknowledge for a quick second the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario, the Ontario Medical Association, and so many other voices that have been talking about the need to move toward mandatory vaccinations and also the need for a vaccine passport here in this province that, again, is standardized and centralized. Two more quick points that I want to make. From my perspective, there is nothing in a mandatory vaccine requirement that needs to be punitive. I don't want a single Ontarian, especially the heroes that we have who've been working on the front lines in both healthcare and education since the beginning of this pandemic. I don't want a single one of them to lose their job. There are so many things that we can do, working with their employers, working with their unions, should they be represented by a union, education programs, of course, adhering to the Human Rights Code as we look at the mandate for required vaccinations. So many things that we can do, even deployments where it might be required to make sure, again, that no woman or man on the front line loses their job. It's just that they are working in critically important areas where there are lots of vulnerabilities. And again, we don't want a fourth wave that's bad, and we don't want school closures, and we don't want those who are getting medical help to be in any way more vulnerable than they need to be. I have incredible faith and confidence in the people of Ontario. I know that we're going to get through this. I know that whatever, should there be a fourth wave, whatever it looks like, we'll get through it. But we need leadership that understands you got to make tough decisions sometimes to actually get to a really successful outcome. And that's why today, Ontario Liberals are calling for a province-wide standardized vaccine passport and for mandatory vaccinations for frontline healthcare and education workers. I believe that these two initiatives combined will get us a long way towards the outcome that we are all looking for in terms of finally getting to the end of this pandemic in the safest and healthiest way imaginable. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Okay, just a reminder to please message the chat with your full name and outlet name if you have any questions. And the first question is Steve Paikin from TVO.
Morning, Stephen. I appreciate you don't want to be punitive about this, but there will plain and simply be people who do not want to do this. So mandatory or else what?
Mandatory, or for example, it could be working with their employers, working with their unions if they're represented by a union, finding a way to redeploy them so they're not actually, let's say, front-facing or public-facing. There's lots of creativity and lots of innovation that we can use here. And I should also mention, yes, there are people who are hesitant for sure. In particular, by the way, and I didn't mention this in my introduction, I should have. We know that there are tons of Ontarians, in particular racialized or Ontarians who come from marginalized communities, who have a lot of understandable hesitancy about the vaccination. We don't want to be punitive. I don't want them to lose their job. There are education programs. There's a way to work with them. There's the way to be empathetic. There's a way, again, if it needs to be, there is a way to have them deployed. I also didn't mention, but I will now. I also hear, look, we are blessed as an Ontario Liberal Party. We have frontline healthcare workers amongst our team of candidates. We have frontline education workers amongst our team of candidates. They are telling us, and they are right about this, that most of their colleagues are doing the right thing and want to do the right thing. For sure, there are some that are still hesitating. So Ontario Liberals want to work with them to get them to a good place because they're working in critically important sectors. But I'm thinking as a dad as well. And, to send my daughters to school in September, and I'm excited that they're going back to school when it comes, they're excited about, okay, that's not true. They're not yet excited about going back to school because they're enjoying their summer, but they want to go back and be with their friends. It's so important for moms and dads to have the peace of mind knowing that our frontline education workers are also, or have also done whatever needs to be done to keep our kids safe. So I think this is the right approach. And I think there's a way to do it creatively so that nobody loses their job.
And let me just pick up on that for the follow-up, which is how you are defining frontline. For example, in a school, would a caretaker be frontline? Would a groundskeeper be frontline, et cetera?
So I would say, look, the way that I would define it is any individual, be it in healthcare or education, who comes into direct contact with, in this case, I'll say the public, but in this case, the students or their parents or their grandparents, depending on the situation that we're talking about. So that's the way that I would define it. But again, I'm open to that conversation to see what makes the most sense, talking to employers, in this case, school boards, talking to unions where an individual might be represented by a union. But I think there's a way, and a very common sense way for us to come to the kind of conclusion that makes the most sense in how we define exactly who is frontline.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
All right, the next question is John Michael McGrath from TVO.
Good morning.
Morning.
You say that you would support a compulsory vaccinations, but I mean, let me maybe ask how much the Liberals would support this. I mean, if this takes calling the legislature back and passing a new law, and do you expect it to take that, and would Liberal MPPs stand up and support legislation if necessary?
It's a great question, John Michael. I appreciate it. I don't actually know what it would require, whether or not it would require passing of legislation. If it would, though, in order to make sure that if there is going to be a fourth wave in Ontario, that we are best positioned to get through it safely, that we don't have to deal with schools being closed again, with small businesses being locked down again, with people in nursing homes. We continue to see outbreaks in nursing homes in this province. We don't want anyone to be in a position, with all that we have collectively gone through and all that we've learned through this pandemic, to be put in that kind of vulnerable spot. So look, I would say if it requires a law, every one of our caucus members is on side with this decision, of course, as are our candidates. And so if it requires a law, we would be working with the other parties to try to get that law passed. I'm not in a position to tell you today, I know for sure what it would require. But again, happy to work with If Doug Ford would only see the light on all of these issues and provide the real leadership we need, be happy to work with him or Andrea Horvath, Mike Schreiner, anybody in the legislature to get us to a spot where we need to be, and every one of our caucus members would as well.
Now, the Liberal Party obviously has an ongoing and historical relationship with teachers unions. Some teachers unions are opposed to the idea of compulsory vaccines, as are some healthcare workers unions. Has the party done any outreach to some of these other stakeholders to explain why you are frankly going against their interests, or do you intend to do so?
So look, I would say for me, it's been almost nonstop consultation with every partner and stakeholder that, if I can call them that we have in both publicly funded education and in healthcare since the beginning of the pandemic. I think, for example, in education, because that's the one that you referenced in particular, I think I've now had seven Zoom roundtables with partners and stakeholders that have included leadership from Teachers Federation. So there's an ongoing partnership, there's an ongoing relationship that I happen to believe is really important when one aspires to be or is serving as a premier, to actually have that ongoing relationship be strong. That doesn't mean you agree on every single issue. And so, look, I know that there are some within different unions who might feel that it's not a requirement to go to a mandatory vaccination. And I respect that opinion. I believe that, first of all, most of the rank and file of all of the unions that we have, like most Ontarians, are doing the right thing as it relates to vaccinations. I believe that most, again, a reflection of society generally, have gotten double vaccinations already, with schools that are planned to be reopened this coming September. But I'm also thinking as a dad, and look, I know there are people on the call, including you, John Michael, who have kids, and it's this last school year was brutal for everybody. You've all heard me say this now for many, many months. We need to use every single tool in the toolkit to make sure that once our schools reopen in September, that our kids are safe, that those who work in the schools are safe as well, that moms and dads have that peace of mind. So I'm talking about mandatory vaccinations today, but this isn't the first time I've talked about how to make sure our schools are properly supported, to make sure that our classrooms are safe, that our kids are safe and healthy. That's why weeks ago, I announced an Ontario Liberal plan capping class sizes at 20, better ventilation, more mental health support, more supports for kids that have special needs. I announced that plan weeks and weeks and weeks ago. I did it last summer of 2020, to make sure that we were ready. There is a long-standing commitment from Stephen Del Duca and the Ontario Liberal Party about how to get publicly funded education right. This is, I know, a tough conversation, but it's the conversation that moms and dads and kids across this province want us to have. And people want to see real leadership. If you want to see real leadership, this is what it looks like. A plan that says we're prepared to make the tough decision after everything we've learned and everything we've gone through over the past 16, 17 months, to make sure that we don't have a fourth wave that's brutal, that our classrooms stay open, that our small businesses stay open, that our healthcare system is top notch, and that we all get to the other side of this pandemic. And there's not a single other party leader in Ontario today, not Doug Ford, not Andrea Horvath, and not Mike Schreiner, who's prepared to show this kind of leadership. And that's why Ontario Liberals, Stephen Del Duca, we are doing it.
Okay, the next question is Ray Chan. Ray, I've been trying to get in touch with you over the chat. I'm not sure of your outlet, so if you could just start by reading off your outlet, that would be great.
Ray Chan I'm from Singtao Daily.
Hi, Ray.
Yeah. Hi, how are you today? And actually, you're talking about teacher healthcare with one vaccine. We have the MMR vaccine and other vaccine, and the student, when they go to school, they have to show their yep. So why not the student?
Well, again, first of all, not every student in Ontario, obviously those under the age of 12 are not eligible to receive the vaccine, but I'd be open to having the conversation about whether, in addition to workers themselves, whether or not students should be included in this category. I know my daughter, who is 13, soon to be 14, has received both of her vaccinations, but for today, we are focused on the healthcare workers and the education workers. But if that needs to be part of the conversation, I'm open to it. I'd want to get advice from the science table. I'd want to hear from Dr. Moore, our new Chief Medical Officer of Health, about that. And I'm really hoping, I will say, I'm really hoping that we can get to a point when Health Canada and others will be able to tell us that the kids under the age of 12 are eligible to safely receive the vaccines. Again, I have a 10-year-old here at home, and so I'm hoping that she'll be in a spot to be able to get the vaccine in the relatively near future. But again, I'm open to that conversation, Ray. Thank you.
Thank you.
Follow up?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that's all the questions. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.